Welcome to my channel. I'm your host Jacob, and in this video, we're breaking down Top Boy Season 3. Well, the final season of Top Boy has just been released, and after the long-awaited wait and anticipation for it, it's safe to say that it didn't disappoint right up until the very last second. If you know, you know. I'm not gonna hang around with a long intro, so let's just get into it. Here is Top Boy Season 3 ending explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. I'm going to break this video down by all of the characters, as all of their stories were so complex and had so much to offer. Sully's story was so interesting in this season, and his ending was almost painted out to us in the first episode, and it opened the story that he'd tell his daughter of a tiger lurking in the tree in the park where he walked Ash to school was metaphorical of the fact that he'd be facing a deadly threat in that very park at the end of the season, whilst also being finished off by somebody that came from the park this season, was very much about Sully owning the fact that he was a monster and understanding what it was like to be on top after forcing the Shane to the side after hearing about how he wanted to retire. We'd always seen Sully living in Dushen's shadow, and it was a place that he didn't like to be, so he took matters into his own hands and knew that whilst Duchenne didn't have his head in the game, it was the right time to act, hence why he killed Jamie. Sully was brutal in this season, and we saw a side to him like we'd never seen before. That attack on side was so hard to watch, and it showed how numb Sully was to the world and the fact that he was evil to the core, with Stefan saying that Sully was on something different compared to Sai and the rest. It showed that Sully was like no other individual there within, taking out Johnny and Teg and removing the Irish threat quite early on in the season. It meant that the 25 kilos of food was something which he was going to give to Shane half of, so that the Shane could be on his way and live the life that he wanted outside of the game and leave Sully to run Summer House. However, with Jax taking it meant that he faced a complex of whether or not to give her free pass and let her live, or to kill her as punishment, something which he did to Kieran for being involved and lying to him. We know Sully doesn't let emotions or relationships get in the way. For example, he killed Dress when he was told to, and they had a long history together, so Jax definitely wasn't safe with Duchenne rubbing the bags off of Jax when they went to meet. It truly marked the beginning of the ending of the show, and we saw that whilst Duchenne was trying to get away, Sully fired at him and injured him, causing him to lay on the floor on the other side of the wall as they then began to speak to one another. This started a great scene that we saw taking place between the two brothers and long-term friends, where Duchenne was almost in shock at what Sully had just done. The fact that this extremely emotional and final moment between them was happening with a large barrier between the both of them was something which I felt was symbolic of the fact that the two always had a divide that lied in the middle, and they were never on equal levels. At least that's what Sully felt. We actually got some emotions from Sully in this moment, where you could sense that there was an ounce of regret in his mind over the fact that he just severely hurt his best friend, but securing the bags was something which was more important to him. All Sully ever wanted was to Shane's respect and to see him as an equal, so when the Shane finally revealed that he did respect Sully, we saw his face change completely. If we're not monsters with food, and I could never be food. This is most definitely one of the most powerful lines in the entirety of the show's history, and it truly summed up the actions of Sully. He killed Driss, a former good friend, and he killed the Shane, basically his brother, so taking away the two most important people in your life is something that definitely does make up a monster. With Sully taking the bags and looking at a Duchenne that was taking his last breath, Sully walked away, a moment that did surprise me, because I thought with him seeing the Shane it would make him think differently, but it showed exactly the type of person that Sully was and that he was never going to change. However, with him staying with the Shane until he stopped breathing and looking down upon him, it showed that there was still something within him. It was a similar look to the one that we saw when he was looking at the photos of Duchenne into Shane's mother's house, and the moments earlier, the final scene with Sully walking in the park that he was in at the very beginning, but this time now with Stefan walking behind him. It was a moment where I truly felt like we were going to see the end of Sully, but Stefan let him be, saying that he wasn't worth it. Sully said that he'd clocked out a feeling a long time ago, but when he turned around, there was definitely a look on his face of relief that he survived, and the understanding that it just looked death straight in the eye, the closest that he'd been for a while. Whilst in a vulnerable state, he understood the process, and maybe that's why he was calm and understood what was going to happen. As Sully got in the car and packed away his stuff, looking like he was ready to get away for a while, the final thing that we had was a bang, as somebody ran past the car and fired at Sully, killing him there and then. We didn't see who it was, but there were a couple of different options. I personally think that it was Jax. I feel Jax would want to take revenge on Sully for the killing of Kieran, and also the fact that she knew that at some point Sully could go for her. Another could be the Irish, with Sully taking up the leader tag, and also Johnny. They could have sent some people over to get revenge, showing that the cycle of revenge is something that will always carry on. And again, if you're like Sully and you've affected a lot of people with the lives that he'd taken, being spared by one such as Stefan doesn't mean that you're spared by all. It was such a good way for the character to go out, and I didn't expect it. It took me off guard because I felt like the show was already over. It was pure perfection. From the writers to Shane, this was the weakest that we'd ever seen to Shane in the entire Top Boy series. He'd lost his empire, he lost his mother, he lost Shelley, he lost his money, and he lost his life. The change journey was just getting worse and worse with every episode, with Leith and Lizzie transferring out all of the money that he gave them to look after. We saw that everything that he'd promised Shelley with the funding for the salon is that she wanted to open became something that he could no longer do. He had nothing to his name other than his emergency fund. We saw that he still mourned his mother from last season, despite the fact that some time had passed. This was seen when he was inside of the care home and he was looking at the elderly woman in the bed. There was a look of reflection there, and I think that was because he missed his mother. With the Shane stepping aside and letting Sully be on top because he knew that he had the money to fall back on, but with it all being gone he went to Jeffrey so that he could find Lizzie. However, when he couldn't, what the Shane went on to do was the very thing that caused his demise. He took out Jeffrey in a fit of rage, and he didn't clean up the scene very well, leaving his prints everywhere, something which did surprise me. This meant that he was the prime suspect and there was a warrant out for his arrest. This meant that he had to leave the country and speak with a guy called Isaac, and the order to do so, with it costing $250K, and with him having no money. That was the reason why he stole the bags off of Jax, because it equated to more than that. However, in his attempt to escape, we saw that he was killed by Sully, a moment that I didn't see coming at all and thought would never happen, because the respect between the both of them was something that I thought would prevent them from harming one another, but it didn't. The streets took to Shane, and I think it's a rather to go, as that's the place that he dedicated his life to. Eventually it catches up to them all, and it did for him. The Shane no longer cared about Summer House. Unlike in the previous season, he just saw it as a place to make money, no matter what devastation or damaging effects it caused. So him being claimed by it worked well, especially at the hands of the person that he was closest to more than anything. Jax acted as the straight thinker in this season, and again, like Sully, there was something in the first episode which confirmed here on Lauren's fate. The woman who was collecting was the image of the destruction to the lives that she felt she was contributing to, and this woman was how she saw Lauren when she found out what she was doing, something which resulted in Lauren's death at the end of episode 2. Jax felt single-handedly responsible for Lauren's death and the other lives that were being ruined in Summer House, and she wanted to prevent the next generation from falling down a dark path where they ended up like the people that they sold to. So in a blind sense of panic, she just took the food that Sully stole from the Irish. The mistake that she made was that she told Kieran just for the sake of telling him something, which eventually got him killed, and it led to Jax feeling as though she was responsible for another death, something which was best reflected in this scene. So death and the responsibility of it was something which she couldn't escape this season, which was why she wanted out of that type of life and to be able to move on. But with her not being able to guarantee a safe pass, which meant that her Bex or the baby would survive, she was fearful of what was to come. Jax's journey ended with her telling Beggs that they were all going to be okay after she was essentially betrayed by Deshane, and she could no longer be safe around Sully. So the theory of her killing Sully is something that I do think stands up, as there's definitely a motive there. In her eyes she was already a killer, so being the person that actually did it wouldn't change her opinion of herself. Stefan's journey was one that was so interesting to follow, and it was one that I was really looking forward to watching unfold. We saw that he was living in some kind of home and Aaron was living in Leeds, which meant that there was no Aaron in this season whatsoever. I don't know, I kind of feel like Aaron should have been there a bit more for Steph, considering that their brother had recently died. That's just my view. Steph adopted Jamie's chain, and he wanted to be the type of person that his brother was almost following in his footsteps, which we saw him doing by being part of Sai's crew and also swearing to seek revenge on Sully. One thing that I loved about Stefan's arc was that we could clearly see the progression of certain things in his life. For example, the scenes on the bench. There were once 3, occasionally 2, because of the life that Jamie got caught up in, and then it became just 1 himself, because he was all on his own. The place he used to speak to his parents became the place that he essentially spoke to his whole family. It was sad. Stefan and Darren were both victims of the harm that Sully had indirectly caused them. This was because Sully killed Aaron's father and also Jamie, Steph's brother, so their coming together was something that felt appropriate and it didn't feel forced at all. Sometimes introducing romance can be a bit cringy and cliché, but it really worked in this instance as there was a strong connection there. Steph's arc was building up to him killing Sully and looking him in the eye and putting him in the position that he put Jamie in when he opened the door, and that ended up happening right at the end. Steph was acting tough in his bedroom when he was looking in the mirror, but we saw that in reality it was a different game, and as he asked how it felt for Sully, his voice was breaking and he didn't sound tough at all. But it was only once in that situation did he realize that Sully, an individual that had taken so much away from so many people, was actually a person that it wasn't worth losing his own freedom over. He realized that revenge wasn't necessarily about getting even, it was about knowing that every day that Sully was out there he was suffering, struggling, not feeling anything, and knowing that there were threats around every corner that were after him. Although realistically Stefan didn't actually need to wait that long anyway. Steph ended as the person who Jamie and his parents would have wanted him to have been, and I think that's the perfect way for his art to end. Overall review: I thought this was the perfect way for Top Boy to end. Nobody on top. The streets caught up with everybody and their own betrayal caused every single demise in the show. We saw how their actions indirectly caused devastation amongst their own families, such as what happened with Lauren, and we saw that the yearning to be on top is something that the person who is on top will always face from others, and they'll never be able to escape. Kano is a phenomenal actor and we need to see him in more. His performance is a top-notch, and whilst the whole cast are great and delivering credible characters, for me he steals it every time. The emotion, conviction and passion that you get from him is so believable, and it transfers across the screens so well. It's weird to think when you look back at the Summer House series all of those years ago, you'd never have predicted the ending that the 2 long-term friends went on to have, and I think that's the way it should be. Even though this final season was only 6 episodes, it felt like so much happened in a short amount of time, and I didn't want it to finish. To the creators, thank you for making an incredible show and providing an ending that it and US viewers deserved. Right up until that very final moment I applauded. It's a one-of-a-kind, and whilst I'm gutted that it's finished, I'm so glad that we got to experience it. So there you have it, Top Boy Season 3 ending explained. What did you think of the final season? Leave a comment down below and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.